Welcome to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics, the podcast that delves into the power of traditional cattle genetics and the ranchers bringing them back. We're returning to the tried and true practices that prioritize what truly works on the ranch. Each episode, we'll talk to ranchers who are rediscovering the methods that built strong, resilient, efficient, and fertile herds in the 1960s and 70s. These breeders are blending the best of the past with practical solutions for today's ranching world. Whether you're passionate about the future of ranching or curious about heritage genetics, this podcast is for you. Presented by Boss Sires. Tune in as we reconnect with the roots of the herd. Here's your host, Patrick Powers.
Hi, and welcome back to Sustainable Stock. Today we're stepping into new territory, the dairy world. I'm joined by Ben Gotschall of Holt Creek Jerseys and Clover Cove Ranch up in the Nebraska Sandhills. Ben has spent decades shaping a dairy program that works with nature instead of fighting it. We'll talk about his seasonal calving systems, how he uses nurse cows to raise stronger calves, and what real sustainability looks like when milk and grass come together. Let's get into it. Mr. Ben, are you with me?
Yes.
All right. Well, before we dive too far in and I lose who you are in the cattle talk, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself to the listeners?
Okay. My name is Ben Gotschall, and I live in the Sandhills of southwest Holt County, Nebraska, so near the town of Atkinson. And I did not, I kind of came back to the ranch in a circuitous fashion. I moved back here to the ranch where I grew up in 2023, December of 2023, and I hadn't lived here for 25 years before that. Kind of did some things after I graduated high school and went to college. I got a degree in English, and I got a master's degree in poetry. And I spent a few years teaching college English, literature, and writing before I decided to get back into agriculture. So I like to read, I like to write, I like to talk about books. That's kind of my non-ranching or non-cattle side of myself.
All right.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, is it just you in this battle for cattle, or is it the whole family?
So I am here on the ranch with my wife, Tammy, and our daughter, Charlotte, who is in third grade. And it's just us here. My mom also lives on the ranch. My dad passed away in November of 2023, and that was kind of the reason, one of the reasons why we decided to come back here to kind of step in and take care of the family ranch.
Okay.
And we're kind of located. I call it the sweet spot of the Nebraska Sandhills. The Sandhills of Nebraska are kind of a vast ecosystem. Covers about a third of the entire state of Nebraska, but we're on the eastern edge of the Sandhills, so we're actually east of the 100th meridian, but we're still in the Sandhills proper and on top of the Ogallala Aquifer. So we have, big, broad, flat, sub-irrigated meadows kind of surrounded by lower, I would say, less steep hills than the western Sandhills, and we're not quite as arid. We get about 24 inches of annual precipitation, so I think it's just right. Combined with our sub-irrigated meadows, we usually can grow some pretty good grass.
That's good. Well, walk me through Holt Creek Jerseys. What do the early days look like? Where did this all start?
So Holt Creek Jerseys is a cattle business that I started when I was 10 years old. I started helping my dad. My dad built a milking parlor on this ranch. Prior to that, the family had mostly run beef cattle. My grandfather was a my grandfather and his brother bred horned Herefords. And then my dad and his brother kind of in the late 70s, early 80s, kind of took that over. And my dad, to diversify, built a milking parlor here on the ranch in 1986, started milking cows. And I started helping out in the parlor a couple years later. And my dad told me if I would help milk the cows for a whole year, I could choose any cow out of the herd to be kind of my annual salary for that first year of work. And so he had some Holsteins, but he also had one Jersey cow in the herd. For some reason, I don't know where she came from or where he got her, but he did breed her. He AI'd her with the straw Jersey semen, and she had a heifer calf. And I said, that is the calf that I want. So I started with the only Jersey in my dad's herd of Holsteins. And so then I had to continue to milk milk cows and do chores to help pay for her feed and stuff. And I kind of just jumped into the Jersey business early. I guess I had a goal of, being the best, and I wanted to have the highest, milking herd in the state, and went to some Jersey sales. I think I took out my first cattle loan when I was 12 years old. My dad had to co-sign for me because I was a minor, but so I just started buying cows at different sales around and visiting other dairy farmers that I could go visit that had Jerseys, and just kind of built my herd up. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I had a fairly decent sized herd of milking cows, and they were the top producing herd in the state, and was getting some national Hall of Fame production records with the Jerseys. And that didn't last long because the dairy industry wasn't really sustainable at that time. The late 90s was kind of a time of consolidation, and the dairy here, we had to basically make a choice that everybody was kind of having to make at that time, which was you got to either get big or get out of this thing, because you're not going to be able to keep up with these big co-ops or these big dairies that are getting contracts with these co-ops. So my dad decided to go a completely different route, and we decided to certify the herd and the land as organic and go completely grass-fed. So he did that with his herd, and I did that with my herd, and that kind of all happened right after I was done with high school, kind of right as I moved away and went to college, and kind of took a different trajectory. But always came back in the summers to help, during college to, help with the hayfield and help with the milking and stuff. But we did some different things, marketing wise to keep the dairy going at that time. We sold raw milk directly to the consumer. We also were producing cream for a buyer that was making butter and producing that butter into pills, like concentrated butter oil pills that were being prescribed to cancer patients and people that had metabolic problems that couldn't basically eat enough fat. And so they had to take these fat pills. Anyway, that was a good market for us but it also got us to really focusing on producing or on raising cattle that weren't really producing extra water, but producing as much butterfat as possible on grass only, because that was the only requirement that milk or that cream buyer had for us, was that it was only during the growing season that he would buy that cream. So that's when we also went to seasonal production, and we just started calving only in the spring, drying everything up in the winter, and we weren't trying to milk cows year round on grass, which is kind of difficult to do.
Yeah. Well, for someone like myself that's uneducated on the world of dairy, just how much does that break with the norm? You're doing that, having a season of being dry.
Well, it's very if you're selling milk to a co-op or to a milk buyer, to a truck, as the dairy folks say, you generally will have a contract, and the contract will usually stipulate that you have to provide a minimum number of pounds or hundredweight of milk every time the truck comes to your farm. And so most dairy cooperatives will not allow you to do seasonal production, for one thing. But those who do, I can't really guess how few people actually do it, but I would say it's less than 5%, maybe even as low as 1% of dairy farmers are fully seasonal production, where they actually have a dormant or a non-milking part of the year. There's a lot of the grass-fed guys who are seasonal calving, so they have a fall calving season and a spring calving season, and those are pretty tight calving windows, but they're milking year round. So like a true spring seasonal, no winter milking, aside from the folks that are maybe, doing a raw milk business, the homesteaders, the raw milk folks that are doing it, there's just not very many people doing it.
What would you say some of the challenges and benefits of how should I state this, of this seasonal approach?
Well, it's you're trying to calve in sync with nature. So, one of the things that we do in addition to the Jersey cattle here on our ranch is we have a herd of bison. That was kind of my dad's end of his life, later years passion project, that he built this herd of bison up. And so when we came back, they were here, and the bison are seasonal calvers. They calve right around they start calving right around the middle of April, and they are done by June. Like usually it's a little earlier. You might get an odd June calf, and you'll see an odd, fall calf once in a while, but like they calve seasonally. And so they're raising those calves and producing their, milk and laying on body condition while during the growing season. And their body changes in the winter time, and they kind of just go into survival mode.
So you had a great example of nature in action to witness that.
Yeah. And we actually synchronize. We try to time our breeding season with our cattle to coincide with the calving of the bison. We're just basically using them as our guide. And so basically we look at April 17th is kind of the average start calving date for the bison on this ranch. And so we basically try to have most of our dairy calves born on 10 days either side of that day. So we try to start calving around April 5th and be done, I shouldn't say be done, but have the bulk of our calving done by the first week of May.
That's great.
And for sure no calving after June. We try to, so we do some things to keep our herd in that window. And part of it is developing the genetics of cattle that can breed back to do that and calve on a 365-day interval. But also, we will cull or market animals that are going to calve outside that window, or that do calve outside that window.
Okay. Well, sir, what does your herd look like today? I know you mentioned your father had Holstein, and you picked out the Jersey, and then he brought along this group of bison. What does your cow herd look like now?
So the herd is predominantly Jerseys. We have one British white heifer that got from a friend, kind of as a kind of a little experiment. We have used some other breeds in the past to experiment with some crossbreeding to develop some dual purpose type cattle, and we learned a lot from that, and we're probably going to continue to do that. Or I guess I should say start doing that again, because we kind of figured out what breeds or bloodlines we want to focus on to introduce to the Jerseys to be able to produce a cow that can do what we want her to do, calve on grass, milk on grass, but then also have that added marketability of beef production. Because jerseys do produce excellent beef. They consistently rate high for quality. They're just not, it takes them a little longer to finish, especially on grass. So, crossing them up with some other breeds really kind of bounces them into that beef production category. And so I just think that the grass-fed dairy of the future is going to be also a beef producing operation, because it's already there's already been a lot of research done. There's already a lot of crossover. A lot of dairies are breeding their cattle to beef bulls. They're using heifer selected semen for the top whatever percent of females in their herd, getting their replacements from that, then breeding the beef, and then those beef cross calves are going into the beef market. So I guess the way I look at it is, if we're doing that anyway, dairy farmers are doing that anyway, why not produce the kind of beef cows that the grass-fed industry wants? If we're going to be supplying them with at least a certain amount of stock, might as well be what works for them.
Absolutely.
And so whether it's it's a true dual purpose operation where you're raising your own beef and milk, or whether you're providing stocker steers or stocker heifers to another operation, I think it just opens up a lot of avenues for collaboration between the grass-fed beef and the grass-fed dairy industry. And so I guess maybe it's because I was kind of raised that way, but I've always thought that grass-fed dairy production was a lot more like grass-fed ranching than it is to dairy farming.
Yeah, I could see how you could find that opinion. I mean, especially if you're going to calve in these windows and attempt to follow nature at the level you have. That's typically what you would find greater in a beef production than you would in most dairies. You talked about the standard set on production value, so it would be hard to follow any of that and meet your quotas.
Yeah, and that's kind of when my dad first started doing this dairy here, he called it a ranch dairy. So like the sign that we got from our first co-op we sold to said Gotschall Ranch on it. And then, when he started his milk kind of business, he called it Clover Cove Ranch Dairy. And so I kind of like that. I've kind of used that as kind of a thought exercise, like what is a ranch dairy and how does a ranch dairy operate? How is it different than a dairy farm?
Yeah.
He kind of set that standard for me early on, and I've kind of kept with it.
Yeah. Well, along those same lines, what other ways would you say that y'all have broken from mainstream dairy?
We've, obviously the direct marketing, we direct market all of our products. So that's not typical, although a lot more people are starting to do that, which is great, because they're, it has fluctuated, and there was kind of a downtime where a lot of dairy farmers were going out of business and there wasn't a direct marketing, but then it kind of revitalized, and I think it's still growing, which is great to see. So the marketing angle is not cool because we don't sell to a co-op. We don't have a contract with DFA or any of the other big milk buyers. The seasonal production we mentioned. All of our milking cows are A2, so they carry the A2. They're homozygous carriers of the A2 beta-casein gene, which is the original non-mutated strain of the beta-casein protein. I'm happy to talk more about that and what it means, but that's something that we started focusing on when we made the shift to grass-fed production. We started using a lot of New Zealand bulls, New Zealand genetics, and back in the day, back in the late 90s, they tested all their tested all of their bulls for the big three milk proteins, which are beta-casein, which is the A2 or A1, and then you've got Kappa casein, and then you've got beta-lactoglobulin. So those are the big three milk proteins, and we focus on all three because all three of them have very, especially the casein or the Kappa casein and the beta-lactoglobulin have a very direct impact on the economic value of your milk. So, the three milk proteins we focus on, and we have been focusing on for, like I said, it's been quite a while, about 20 years. We've had the odd non-A2 cow born because, playing around with different genetics or bringing something in, but we've had an all A2 milking herd now for the last, since we've been probably about getting close to 15 years, probably more like 13 years.
Okay. Well, for someone not familiar with what that means, what would the benefits to the consumer be of A2 dairy?
Okay. Well, the main benefit for A2 dairy from a human perspective is it's the A2 variant of the beta-casein protein is the original kind of strain of protein that cows had way back when, that kind of when humans and cows kind of merged to coexist together, and humans started drinking the milk of cows, and that was the type of protein, beta-casein protein, that cows produced. And then somewhere, I don't know how long ago, somewhere along the line, that protein mutated into two different types. One was and they've isolated that, and they call it A1, is the mutated strain, and that has a histamine effect in some people, and so some people will be actually allergic to the protein. And something really important to note is A2 deals specifically and only with a protein. It has nothing to do with butterfat. It has nothing to do with lactose, which is a sugar. So people who are truly lactose intolerant, who are allergic to the sugar, or whose bodies can't digest the lactose sugar, that's one thing. And then being allergic to the A1 protein, the mutated protein, that's another thing. But they look the same. And so a lot of people say, oh, I was lactose intolerant, but now I can drink A2 milk. Well, you maybe were never lactose intolerant. You might have just had an allergy to that A1 protein. So anyway, the A2 protein there's actually a milk brand that's the A2 Milk Company, and some of the cooperatives that are buying milk are encouraging their farmers to breed, to use A2 genetics. There's a lot of milk brands that advertise A2 milk, that their milk is A2, because it's just more, it's just more drinkable and digestible for everybody.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ben, you spoke about your family's push into the grass-fed shift, and we've only covered what one of the benefits of that were. Could you describe what the others were?
Yes. So when my dad decided to change directions, he said, I remember the day he said it, he said, Ben, we're not going to be producing a commodity for a market anymore. We're going to be producing food for people. And so we're going to have to do things differently, because we have to produce a product that's good for people, because we don't, that was part of his values, and we're going to produce something that's healthy. So we just basically had to learn what's the healthiest milk that you can produce, that is worthy of people going through the maybe hassle of buying it direct from the source. So, obviously we went organic, we went grass fed. And we just learned so much more about the health benefits of grass-fed milk, with the higher omega-3 fatty acids, the higher conjugated linoleic acids, the CLAs. But it was also better for the cows. We saw an immediate, change in the way the cows, and these were not cows that had been developed for grass-fed production. Some of them, when we took the grain away, fell apart, the Holsteins and stuff. But, those little Jerseys, for some reason, they just seemed to be able to roll with that change. And they were active grazers. They went out and did their job and went out on pasture. And as we learned how to manage grazing better, they really responded to that. And so that was also when my dad kind of started using my Jersey bulls on his cows, and he kind of started a he kind of started a crossbreeding, I hate to call it an experiment because it was more like a shotgun approach, where it was just like, oh, this breed is supposed to be good for grass production. Let's try some of that. This breed is supposed to be good. Let's try some of that. So he was using all kinds of stuff. So he was using like French Normandy, milking shorthorn. I think we had some Tarantays. His herd was very colorful. But I kind of stuck with the Jerseys and, did the New Zealand thing. And that was when we started to realize that if we're going to do this, we have to have a cow that's capable of taking care of herself, producing enough milk on grass only to justify her keeping and to be profitable, to breed back to calf, and, to do all that on grass. And then so when we got that cream or butter market and we switched to seasonal, that put even more pressure on the cows to be more efficient, and just really, they just had to be able to breed on the first or second cycle.
Well, hell, to go further on that, it put even greater pressure on your wallet.
Yeah.
You had to create a product utilizing a tool, your cattle, that were efficient enough and required so little of input that you could pause that production for a portion of the year and still maintain profitability.
Yes, absolutely. But it turns out that, it's, even if we had wanted to milk year round, it's really difficult to do that profitably, and I think a lot of the farmers that are, producing quote unquote grass-fed milk, for a co-op or a major grass-fed milk label, it's difficult to produce milk profitably, grass-fed, no grain milk through the winter profitably. It costs you more to do. It's harder on the cows, and quite honestly, the product is not the same. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't care who you are. If you get a glass of milk that was produced in January on baleage and maybe some alfalfa hay or some other type of non-grain grass-fed approved input, and then you put that right next to a glass of milk that was produced in June on rapidly growing diverse polyculture pastures, that are just bursting with beta carotene and all that good yellow color, it's completely different. So they're,
we can accept that with wildflower honey, but
yeah, exactly. Milk is even more, cows are even more susceptible to changes in their diet affecting the milk. I mean, you notice it immediately if they're eating something different. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can't give me the quote unquote and then not go into that. So
the quote unquote.
You said quote unquote in regards to grass-fed operations. What are the games played there, sir? And how do y'all set apart?
Well, to be grass-fed.
If you're not comfortable, we don't have to.
To be grass-fed certified, it's just like being certified organic. You have a list of approved inputs that you don't get to decide on. You just get this list. You can petition that stuff, but you have a standard that you have to follow. And then like I said, there's very few places in North America where you can milk cows on grass through the winter. You can graze through the winter. You can graze stockpile forage, but like actual grass fed, there's not very many places where your grass in the wintertime is going to be nutritionally robust enough to keep a lactating animal producing. So anyway, the grass-fed industry, the grass-fed milk industry, they don't want to be seasonal. They want to have that year-round cash flow. So, they're encouraging producers to milk through the winter. And some of the co-ops even offer a winter milk premium. But, what a lot of those producers are finding is that premium on the winter milk doesn't come close to what it actually costs them extra to produce that winter milk. And so they're kind of just crossing their fingers and hoping that it averages out through the year to where they have their low input time of year on pasture. But it doesn't always work. So the cost to produce that grass-fed milk in the winter is very high. And so I'm not saying there's any like real difference. Like, I think cattle can still be well fed and comfortable, and I think that the product itself can still be high quality. It's just different. And so we just kind of chose not to play that game because I guess we just look at our milk and the products that we produce like any other seasonal delicacy, like wild asparagus or, soil grown tomatoes or anything else, strawberries, anything that you can't wait till it's that season so you can have that food and it tastes like you remembered it from last year. And that's kind of how our customers look at our milk. They're anxious and they're anticipating us to start milking, and then they're, like right now, they're like, oh, are you guys going to dry the cows up in another month? Oh, what are we going to do? It's like, so that's kind of what we want. We want to produce a high quality, high value, high nutritional product that people love, that people will be confident in purchasing, and that they will that is in line with our values too. We don't want to just sell people as much of a certain commodity that we can to try to make as much money as possible. We do want to be profitable, and we do sell our milk at somewhat of a premium, although it's that's all relative when you look at the nutrient density. So it's
I like the way you handled that. That's all. It's all relative. Well, sir, to shift the conversation back a little bit, we talked about your father and sourcing genetics and how he just started experimenting. What would you say some of the challenges people trying to recreate what you've done and do this seasonal dairy, what would be the challenges they would face in sourcing genetics in the current market?
Well, there's not a lot of people truly proving their bulls on pasture. There are some breeders that are raising dairy bulls on pasture, but the conventional bull stud industry, they have now started to have this grazing index that's like a number that some computer generates based on a composite ranking of certain traits, but they're not actually putting those bulls out on pasture and putting them and forage testing them. And so that's a challenge because, that instinctual or great, what Bison called grazing ability, what I can't remember what Johann Zeitzman calls it. Anyway, just that ability to go out and graze and spend enough time doing it to fill yourself up and so that you can go lay down and ruminate. But very few stud breeders in the dairy industry, almost none of them are doing that with bulls. And so, we immediately saw a need to do that and saw a benefit from doing it, which was keeping our own bulls out of our best cows and raising them either on their own mother or on a nurse cow. Because it's really difficult. It's hard for me to not milk a good cow. And so, there's folks out there who leave the calves on the cows and then take the milk that's left. But I like to have my milk cows. We have our milk cow herd and our nurse cow herd. And the nurse cow herd raises all the calves on pasture, and the milk cow herd gets milk. So everybody has a job. Everybody knows what their job is. And so the nurse cow herd is basically raised like a cow-calf beef herd, only it's cow-calf-calf. So each nurse cow raises 2 calves. So half the herd is nurse cows, half the herd is milk cows. The half that is the nurse cows raise all the calves.
Oh, wow. So they've got double duty.
Yeah. And our nurse cows are expected, basically to raise 2 calves to weaning, which is 6 to 7 months. And we expect them, in order to be considered a bull mother for a nurse cow, she has to be able to wean 100% of her body weight in that time and breed back and have a calf again next year. And the milk cows, they have to produce high quality milk, high quality food for people and breed back, within our calving window. So we put a lot of pressure on them.
Yeah, they've got quite a bit to prove.
And in the early days, a lot of them didn't make it, and I say didn't make it, but we just didn't use their offspring for breeding stock. We're not like forcing them to die or anything like that. We just, if they can't pass the test, we just don't use their offspring for breeding stock. It's that simple. We don't, obviously if a cow needs help, if a cow, is having, goes into negative energy balance, you gotta help her out. But then that doesn't mean you save her bull calf to breed your herd. So, anyway, there's just not a lot. I don't see a lot of that in the dairy world. I don't see hardly any of it. There are a couple breeders that I've worked with in some parts of the country, and that's the way things were done, in New Zealand for a long time too, because they had a seasonal production model there as well.
Well, are there any other challenges for them to stay within the herd that we haven't mentioned already?
So, disposition, obviously we're milking them, we're handling them. They got to be, they have to be a joy to be around. So, if we don't want them teaching calves to be high-headed and wild. So, we don't like wild nurse cows. And the dairy cows, like I said, their production, we don't look at production volume. It is nice to have a cow that produces a lot of milk, but they have to, obviously, we mentioned the A2 protein. They have to be homozygous for that. They have to produce enough milk. They have, but the butterfat percent, because one of the products we produce is a butter product. So we need that yield of butter fat. And so that's where a couple of the other proteins come in, insofar as their effect on yield of product. So the Kappa casein that I mentioned, that's a cheese yield gene. The desirable genotype is BB. There's also A and AB, but the BB variant yields up to 15% more cheese per gallon of milk. So right there, I mean, if you can increase your yield of product by 15% just by using a bull that's homozygous and getting calves that are homozygous for that gene, I mean that's just an automatic 15% economic boost to your herd.
Absolutely.
And then the other one is the beta-lactoglobulin, which is another component of milk, and the studies that they've done on that show that the BB variant of the beta-lactoglobulin results in up to an 11% higher butterfat yield than the AA variant. So If you've got cows that are A2, BB, Kappa casein, BB, beta-lactoglobulin, you're basically, that's as good as you can get. It has every economic advantage that you can possibly give yourself. And you can do all that through genetics. It's just 100% heritable traits. They're either heterozygous or homozygous for what you want or for what you don't want.
Yes, sir. Well, to take that to the next step in an effort to keep all these great positives coming out of these bloodlines, do y'all participate in line breeding?
Yes. Yeah. We've done some line breeding. We've used line bred bulls. We've tried to, through line breeding, not only concentrate and fix, and when I say fix, I mean correct as well as make consistent certain, the traits that we want. So, we've done line breeding along paternal lines, where there was a particular bull, maybe that was long gone, and we couldn't really get that, semen from that bull anymore, or the bull was dead. So we could, use line breeding through his offspring. And then, when we identify cows and cow families that are high performers, we want to continue to line breed with them. So I guess the way I look at it is, there's a lot of focus on the bulls, and the bulls are important, and how they perform is very important also. But really in dairy, for me at least, I look at it more as like, which cows do I want to breed my cows to? Like, which characteristics of a good cow do I want to see in the rest of the herd? And so,
yeah, you're breeding families, not individuals.
Yeah, the male offspring of my ideal cow is nothing more than a vehicle to transfer her genetic material to the other cows in my herd.
I like that mentality.
So I'm breeding cows to cows. And so, I definitely pay attention to the bulls and how they perform, what they look like. They obviously have to be ideal specimens as well, because they have a job to do and they have to have the physiognomy to do it. But when I started concentrating more on line breeding along maternal lines, that was when I think I started to see more and better results.
Yeah. Well, what was the thing that drew you to line breeding? Was it just the predictability of what you were getting?
Yes, you do get a certain amount of Well, originally I was a lot younger than I am now when I started doing it. So originally it was kind of more of a challenge, I guess. Maybe I had a little more ego back then, and I heard people saying, "Oh, you don't want to have inbred cows. You don't want to line breed." I'm like, really? Because I think I could do it. But also, if you look at the histories of the breed and you read like biographies or works about like Robert Bakewell, for example, in the Longhorn breed, and the now I'm drawing a blank on their name, but the two brothers that basically developed the Shorthorn breed. And then
please don't ask me to come up with it.
I can't remember their name now, but I had it on the top of my head. But you look at the history of the Jersey breed, and almost all of the great bulls and great cows in those breeds were line bred, and some of them were intensely line bred to the point of incestual inbreeding. And so I'm not saying that we should do it for the sake of doing it, but if we have a goal and we have a result that we want to see, that is the quickest way to get there. It's not the easiest way, because you're gonna magnify and really bring to the forefront any weakness that a bloodline has, and so you have to have the commitment and the kind of the integrity to just say, okay, this one didn't work. I've got to get rid of this either this bloodline or this individual, because I can't allow this to perpetuate. But if you do that and you make that decision and you have that kind of mentality, you can make a lot of rapid progress. And I don't think most breeders do. and it's difficult with dairy cows because you're going out there and milking them every morning and you like them and they're sweet and all that. So, but
No, I think you did a really good job highlighting that there. That's something that a lot of people do participate in it, but they don't point that out as well. So they only talk about the benefits of it. And your note there was really well said, that you're going to get an expression of everything and you have to be willing to judge everything.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of have to know what you want before you start. And it doesn't have to be, Bonsma, talked about having a picture in your mind of what you're breeding toward. Zeitzman kind of poo-pooed that and said, no, you just want them to do what you want them to do. Doesn't matter what they look like, and you've got you've got kind of a middle ground there where, it's kind of a form and function or a chicken and egg thing. Does form follow function or does function follow form? And the answer is yes. I think.
Sir, how many dairy farmers, if I were to call 100 of them today, are going to sit here and quote Johann Zeitzman for me and Bonsma?
Well, there would be more than you would think.
Really?
They're out there, but they're definitely not the dominant force in the industry. But they are doing what they're doing, and they're doing it well. And their willingness to learn from other. I think that willingness to learn from other. What do I want to say? It's not really another industry. It's another. I just think there more progress would be made in agriculture or food production or whatever you want to say if us dairy farmers would learn more from the beef ranchers and vice versa, because I think there's really a lot more in common, especially when it comes to figuring out how to produce food sustainably in the future. Maybe with fewer acres, I don't know, maybe with hotter summers and more flood events. I don't know. I don't want to get down a climate change, trail, but when these things happen, these extreme weather events or weather patterns, when they happen, because they're going to happen, they always have and they always will. How do we continue to produce high quality food that nourishes our population? And I think that if we lock ourselves into different models and aren't willing to look outside of that, we're not doing ourselves any favor. So,
yeah, I've had other guests that speak on when we don't open ourselves to it, we lose our food security. When we can learn from each other, we fortify each of our sectors of the industry. Right.
And exactly. Well, and just kind of what I talked about earlier about the beef on dairy crossing, we've got the lowest, the beef industry is at the lowest numbers it's been since the 50s. So is the dairy industry. But imagine what the beef industry would be like if they weren't getting any of those beef cross dairy calves at all. Like those are going somewhere. They're part of the beef. Once they leave the dairy, they're part of the beef industry all of a sudden. So,
Sir, you're saying the quiet part out loud. Everybody forgets about the dairy crosses whenever we're talking about the current state of the beef market.
Well, and there has been research done on that, and the demonstrations and the trials that they did, and they did most of them in New England. So you have to admit that they were geographically not isolated, but confined to a region, have shown that. And it's hard for a rancher to say this out loud, but some dairy operations can actually produce beef cattle or beef itself more efficiently than a beef ranch. And I think that says just as much about the state of the beef ranching practices today as it does about the dairy industry.
Absolutely. Well, that would be one of the reasons you're on here today, sir, is because you check a lot of the boxes for the Boss Sires gang with your grass-fed shift that y'all made and y'all's production and the care y'all put into your cattle and your recognition of the way the genetics of the industry are going. That's one of the many reasons we're speaking to you today.
I'm just thrilled that to have this conversation. It's great to have that interest, and I'm really glad that you reached out.
Yes, sir. Mr. Ben, is there anything we haven't spoke about yet that you really feel that the world would benefit by hearing or getting out there?
Well, we could talk a little bit about the low stress kind of system that we've tried to develop here. We could talk a little bit about fertility benchmarks also, if you'd like.
Absolutely. I'm really interested into the stress. I mean, we're consuming the hormonal product of an animal. I imagine that not having that same stress hormones come be present in that product would be a benefit.
Yes, you put that well. And I think when I say low stress, when I say we try to produce dairy products or, milk cows in a low stress environment, I mean it for the cows, but I also mean it just as importantly for us, for the humans. And so, the seasonal milking contributes to that. It's great to wake up that morning in December and know that you don't have to go milk the cows and that you've got a few months off.
Yeah.
It's great we only milk once a day. So it's great to, go out, take your time, milk your cows, and know that you're done so that you can go to your daughter's volleyball game that evening and you don't have to come back and do chores. So the human stress, we've kind of tried to, you always hear all the arguments about why kids or why young people don't want to get into dairy farming or why people don't go back to the dairy farm they grew up on. It's like, oh, you got to milk those cows 23 times a day, 24/7 all year round and all that. It's like, well, we're going to just remove those barriers right now. Like we're not going to do that. We're going to do it.
I don't imagine I'd want to go back to that either.
Yeah, we're going to do it in a way that we enjoy, and the cows enjoy it too. So bringing cows into that system, we do remove for the milking cows, we do remove their calves, but we remove them like they go out on pasture, a half mile away, and they've got a mom and they've got a buddy, and those calves are living their best life. And those nurse cows are nurse cows for a reason. It's because they love calves and they take care of them and they raise good ones.
Well, they have to be able to do 2 a year.
Yeah. And those milk cows are milk cows for a reason, and it's because they're good at their job. And believe it or not, some of those milk cows, I think, have decided that they kind of like that. And it's not that they've lost their maternal instinct, because they definitely are very maternal cows, but they just know I can't say it any other way. They just know what their job is and they do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned fertility earlier, that we could cover that. What do you have to say on fertility? The common theme with boss sires is we feel fertility is very heritable. And when we say that the industry states that it's low, they may not come out and say it that way, but they say it's very low. It's very low on the bar of what is a heritable trait. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think part of it is just like defining it as a trait, because to me, fertility is not a trait. It's like a condition. It's like a state of being. So a cow can be infertile and a cow can be fertile. And yes, you can feed her into fertility. But to me, and I know there's like a scientific term for it, but it's not a composite trait. Maybe it is that. Maybe it's a composite trait. Anyway, fertility, however you decide to define fertility, whether that's the 365-day calving interval, let's say it's that. There's no
well, you're
one
drawing a hard line with that for a lot of the industry.
Right. Yeah. Well, but if you're going to be seasonal in calve in spring and be dry by Christmas, you got to have that. So,
Yes,
there's just so many things that go into that. There's so many things that go into a cow being able to conceive on that first, second, or third heat, or to even have that first, second, or third heat. I guess looking at it as a trait that's either heritable or not to a degree, to me, is kind of like the wrong thinking. It's like to me, it's like a state. It's a condition. Your cows are fertile or they're not, and they get that genetically. Yes, I think it's highly heritable, but it's not like one thing that you can isolate and say, aha, this is the fertility gene. We found it. It's always, so if you're going to look at it that way, then yeah, of course it's not heritable because it doesn't exist. but all of
You're right. There's not limiting factors. So your cow needs to be able to achieve these other goals to maintain fertility.
Right.
It needs to be able to achieve this with this. And I'm sorry, carry on.
Right. And so when you put your cow herd on a plane, PLANE, and of performance, and you have a benchmark and you have a standard, and you put selection pressure on them, then you find out which ones are transmitting fertility. If you stick with it and you keep records, you see which ones are transmitting fertility. And so it's not like they're giving a gene to their offspring. They're giving their offspring, I would say it's more of an epigenetic thing almost too, and I don't want to get down that, what is epigenetics, but I think maybe a lot of your listeners will know what that is, but I think it's an epigenetic thing too. And
okay,
if there's something that the conventional dairy stud industry does not want to talk about, it's epigenetics. So dismissing fertility as a non-heritable trait is a great way to not have to talk about that.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, sir, you cracked the egg there on the industry's willingness to discuss different things. What do you think the industry is doing wrong? Where are we pushing people in the wrong direction? Why are more people not thinking along the lines you are of your enjoyment of the cattle, their capabilities within these systems of low input? Do you have any opinion on the matter in that regard?
Yes. I think what the dairy industry has done with genomics, and I say that as someone who genomically tests every single one of my calves that's born. I genomically test them for certain things that I'm managing for. And I mentioned the milk proteins, but also the polled, we're trying to breed for polled genetics. So I genomically test every single calf that's born. But genomics in terms of ranking the breeding value of sires and dams, because we have a situation in the dairy industry where we have the top genomically rated females for whatever trait, for production index or performance index or milk production. And these are 3-month-old calves that have not successfully conceived. They have not given birth to a live calf. They haven't completed a lactation. We don't know what they can actually produce, but we have this genomic number that assigns a value to her, and everybody is chasing that higher number. Everybody wants more. And the effect that is having is you've got the top sires are bull calves that were just old enough to get collected, and they haven't actually even successfully impregnated a female. You have, like I mentioned with the heifers, they just don't have to prove themselves in the real world. And I think that does the cattle a disservice, and I think that does the people who are breeding them a disservice, because when you make everything dependent on a computer program, you take away a lot of the skill and a lot of that, art of cattle breeding. And I don't want to be that kind of breeder.
Yeah, well, it doesn't sound like dairy's the only one falling victim to that.
Right, and I understand why these genomics exist, but what I don't understand is how we can pretend that it's the best, in some cases, the only way to make genetic progress. Because to me, it's like the opposite of progress. It's like everything we can do to make sure we don't actually find out what actually works in the real world, we're going to do that thing instead of putting bulls with heifers and seeing if they can get them pregnant, and milking the cows to see how much milk they actually give and what it makes up, or what makes it up. So I don't really know where I'm going to this. I don't want to say genomics are bad and people who use them are bad. I think that they create an environment in which it's very difficult to compare. For me anyway, it's hard for me to know.
Well, it's hard to compete with a maybe. It's hard to compete whenever
Right.
people are so focused on rewarding a maybe. It's the same as the EPD game.
Right.
You create this pairing of probablys and maybes and could be's, and it's only been proven in data. We haven't stopped to check and see if that's an actual case in the physical world. But you make this, I mean, why can we not, if that's the case, why isn't there a program right now spitting out names for the best pairing of cattle in the world? If that was truly the way our world worked, why isn't, I mean, as far advanced as we are with technology, I shouldn't be talking to cattlemen today. I should be asking ChatGPT what cattle I should marry together to create the super cow that's going to give me more beef, more fat, more marbling, more milk than ever. Well, come to find out, that doesn't really work. I'm sorry, I went on a tangent.
Well, an interesting result happens when something that's very interesting that happens with genomic selection, especially in dairy. And this has happened with the Holstein breed. When you breed by the numbers and what the computer tells you to breed, you're breeding the hottest, most popular bulls to the hottest, to your cows. Because of the way that number is generated, the top bulls in a season are going to be, a lot of them are closely related. And so what they actually found is that breeding by those numbers did increase production, but it also increased inbreeding. And so there's kind of a problem where they're like, oh, but inbreeding is bad. We don't want people to think that line breeding is something that can increase production. So they kind of just downplay that or don't want to mention it. But genomics increases inbreeding. It also increases production. It also has not improved fertility. So you've got some interesting things happening at the same time, none of which I think are necessarily desirable, because productivity doesn't correlate with profitability, especially if it's at the expense of fertility. And, more is not a number. More is not a goal. Like, you can't just say, I want to have more. I want to have more milk. I want to have more, And so the way that whole system works is it incentivizes using new, unproven, high indexing sires on your cows, on your young cows, and basically getting rid of your older cows, like your older cows and the daughters of your older cows, especially if they're sired by older, proven, more reliable bulls, have low to the point of even being negative numbers. And so we're by breeding for the numbers and using genomics as a selection tool, we're inadvertently breeding away or de-incentivizing the use of the cows and their offspring that have proven themselves to be the most useful, meaning that they stay in the herd long.
Yeah. And unfortunately, whenever you treat it that way and act that way, when there's finally an aha moment that there's no longevity within this bloodline, because it's all been unproven thus far, it's a little too late. It's already influenced 90% of your herd.
Yeah. But yeah. I understand why people use genomics. I'm not saying that they're bad people for doing it. But that's I understand why they do it. I would not be able to understand myself if I did it. If that makes any sense. So I can't do something that doesn't feel right to me. So
Yes, sir.
I don't even look at those numbers.
Well, to make a hard shift away from that portion of our conversation, I have a note that states that you also participate in teaching grazing courses to some degree. Could you speak on that?
Yeah. So before I moved back to Nebraska in 2023, I was working on a nonprofit dairy on the coast of Maine, and I was a mentor grazer in the dairy grazing apprenticeship program. So the DGA, it's a program that's put on by the Dairy Grazing Alliance, and it's a Department of Labor certified accredited apprenticeship program. So just like you go and become an apprentice electrician, and then you fulfill that requirement and you become a journeyman electrician, you can enroll with the dairy grazing apprenticeship and be an apprentice, and it's a 2-year apprenticeship. And then you graduate, and you have to do, I want to say it's a couple thousand hours of on-the-job training. It's a 2-year full-time earn while you learn employment. Part of that is the apprentices have to have hours in continuing education in several categories. One of them is grazing management. One of them is holistic management, business management, business planning, and the one that I teach is dairy cow nutrition. And I am woefully unqualified to teach that class. I do not have an animal science degree. I got a degree in poetry, for crying out loud. I think maybe the reason why I'm doing it and still doing it is because of my grazing background, but also because I just feel like there's so much more that we have to learn. And I guess so teaching that class is kind of my way of fulfilling that need in myself of lifelong learning. Because I don't really know how to teach people anything, but I do know how to put myself in a situation where I'm going to learn something alongside of them. And so that's kind of what I try to do. So, we talk about some different things. We talk about grass only. We talk about grain feeding. We talk about, different feed ingredients and minerals and vitamins and how they behave in the rumen and what comes out the cow, in terms of the milk product, and how that's determined by what you feed her. And so, yeah, it's a fun class. And those classes are available to anyone. You do not have to be a dairy grazing apprentice to take those classes. Anyone can enroll in those classes through the MAGIC. I call it MAGIC. It's the Managed Grazing Innovation Center, MGIC.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, I would like to add a link to that in the show notes for today.
Sure. Yeah.
I think any resource tool we can offer the listeners to have a greater understanding of our relationship with our cattle is a benefit.
Yeah. And I know I have at least 2 or 3 folks in my class right now this semester that are beef, doing at least some beef production. And so they're kind of approaching it as, if I can learn how a person can get a cow to produce a profit on grass by lactating cow, it's very similar to finishing a steer on. I think the one student that when I asked him on the first day, he said, I consider dairy grazing to be the master's degree, like your PhD. Like if you can do that well, then raising dry beef cows on pasture is easy. There's just different considerations. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I like it. Sir, I think we've covered quite a bit. And so I think it's about time that I ask the same question I ask all my guests. And that is, in your opinion, what is our moral obligation to the land, the cattle, and the future generations?
Wow. I really like that question. very, very philosophical.
Come on, give me the poet's answer.
Well, I guess my immediate reaction is maybe because we were just talking about it, but I think we have an obligation to learn. I think we have an obligation to learn what the land needs and to learn about the history of our land. I think we have an obligation to learn what the cows need, and I think we have an obligation to learn what people need in terms of not only the lifestyle that we can have by doing this work, but also because we produce, at the end of the day, like my dad told me, 30 years ago, we're producing food for people. And what do people need? And in this day and age, in this world, people need nourishment, not just physical nourishment from food, but nourishment from living a life that's fulfilling and that's enjoyable and that's safe. And I think that's anybody's obligation, not just us folks raising cattle and producing beef or milk or whatever. So I guess that's my answer.
That's very well said, sir. I like that. It calls to more than just the producer. It calls to all of us. Well, Mr. Ben, I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing what you've built along with your family. It's proof that nature is still the best business partner we've got. For the listeners, you can learn more about Ben's work at holtcreekjerseys.com, or you can find all of his links listed in our show notes for today. Thanks for tuning into Sustainable Stock. Follow us wherever you like to listen to us and share it with someone who cares about good cattle and good land. Don't forget to ranch with purpose
and breed for the future.
Thank you for tuning in to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. Join us next time as we continue exploring the legacy and future of cattle ranching. For more information, visit us at bosssires.com. That's BOSSIRES.com. Or connect with us on Facebook. Until then, stay rooted in common sense and connected to the herd.